Hello everybody, welcome to our Sunday talk show, The World This Week. I spent most of this week in Kiev, talking to people and trying to understand what went wrong, how peaceful demonstrations motivated by mounting economic concerns turned into a war on civilians by their own corrupted government. Later on, we'll air an exclusive interview with Viktor Yushchenko, Ukraine's former president. First, our special report from the streets of Kiev. This is the heart of Kiev this week, the Maidan Independence Square. It's a battlefield turned shrine, turned symbol. Flowers all around, candles and pictures of the dead and missing. People are looking for someone they may know. Thousands of people walk here day and night. There are hundreds living in tents. The temperature is sub-freezing most of the time, but they will not quit. They burn wood to get warm. Hot soup is being served, and they are determined to stay. It's like a war zone with burned buildings and piles of rubble and barricades. More than 95 people died here. One war is over. Nobody knows what's next. Hey! 45 million people live in Ukraine. They speak 18 languages. And Ukraine hosts 5 nuclear plants. These Ukrainians in Kiev know exactly what they want.
I don't like Russia in the Ukraine.
Do you think there will be peace or war at the end?
Just a war again? No, don't war in the Ukraine and in the world. I don't like war.
It's going on and on around the clock, even after dark, and it gets really dark with limited street lighting. They walk slowly in the cold night, but the voice down the square never ceases to call Vladimir Putin to go home. Speakers come up one after the other, everybody gets a few minutes, and it's going on live on television for hours and hours. Tension runs high. The war is in the air.
Russia is wrong with what it's doing. It has no right to intervene in the Ukrainian conflict. It reminds me of the situation in South Ostia.
Oleg Rivchuk, Ukraine's former deputy prime minister, now a blatant speaker for the revolution.
What is clear for me, it's now not issue of Ukraine-Russian relationship. It's the global challenge of the global structure of security. Plan A for Mr. Putin was to make Ukraine a member of Union of everlasting, never re-elected presidents. And our president got this ambition to join the club. That scenario failed. Plan B for Mr. Putin was, if he cannot do that, then Ukraine must be divided, separated. And now Mr. Putin is practically before the collapse of his plan B, because his plan B was not only Crimea, but his plan B was to ignite the whole so-called Russian-speaking constituencies, which he called to President Bush. You remember that famous phrase that there is no Ukraine, that there are mostly Russians, not Russian-speaking Ukrainian, but Russians, and therefore there are a few regions which may be called a Ukraine. There is no such territory, he said. Then secondly, we see that the world is shocked. But what Ukrainians here are saying on Maidan, at one hand we have deep concern of the civilized world, at the other hand we have heavily armed Russians, already third day, provoking, bringing in more troops every day, concentrating troops on the borders, violating all the international laws. So when you have deep concern at one hand and armed invasion at the other hand, they are not actually matching each other. So we see the challenge for the global structure. We see the challenge for EU. I had the pleasure of meeting President Putin and Medvedev many times, specifically Medvedev. I remember how I tried to convince Mr. Putin that the origin of Ukrainian demonstrations in 2004 was not Western money, training of the terrorists, George Soros money. It's just people would like to see themselves being able to vote and to get elected somebody whom they voted for. He never believed. So the country is wrong, party is wrong, everyone is wrong, but Yanukovych calls himself legitimate and Mr. Putin accepts it. So something is wrong in this system.
People here describe the whole thing as a peaceful demonstration by naive students. They protested against the corrupted government with sit-downs and songs, and within days, they were fired upon by police snipers from the roofs.
I'm sad. When I'm looking here, I'm sad because people died, and all people that are going here can't hold tears and feeling sad. Yeah.
What do you think will happen in the future?
If I think we manage this, I think we can send Ukraine because it's our country and we love it.
So you're optimistic?
Yeah, I'm optimistic.
This was the picture in Kiev, and now on the phone with us is Paula Slier, Middle East Bureau Chief for Russia Today, now in Crimea. Hello, Paula. Where are you, and what's happening there?
Hi, I'm here on the ground in Simferopol, which is the capital of Crimea. I'm actually out on location with what they're calling themselves a self-defense unit. That is a group of pro-Russians inside the city. What we're hearing a lot of conflicting reports, but what I'm sensing on the ground is that you've got a lot of these paramilitary groups that have formed themselves into what they say are self-defense units. We're out at a checkpoint where they're monitoring what they say is some 300 protesters who are making their way here from Kiev. So the feeling on the ground is very much that there's going to be a confrontation between what they're saying are provocateurs making their way here, people here saying that they're having to defend themselves, but all of this coming amid reports that Russian military troops are actually making their way to the region. So it's a little bit difficult to get an accurate sense or an objective sense of what is actually happening, but certainly a very tense-filled security situation on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've heard the view in Kiev. We're going to have the interview with former President Viktor Yushchenko in a minute. Can you give us the Putin view on what's going on?
Well, the Russian president maintains the same that he said all along, and that is essentially that he doesn't want to see Ukraine used as an excuse for an escalation of tensions between Russia and the United States. But Putin's point is that he has a legitimate right to protect ethnic Russian citizens. You need to remember that at least 58% of the population here in Crimea identifies ethnic Russians. 97% of people in Crimea use Russian in their everyday language. So he says he's responding to a call for help. And all these calls and statements from the West that he's sending troops here, he says it's fully within the agreement that Russia has with the Crimea. It is allowed to have a certain number of troops in the country, and it hasn't exceeded that number. So Putin dismisses all these claims that he's trying to join Crimea with Russia. He says that is the feeling on the ground. They're very much pro-Russia, and he's simply responding to the Crimean, which is now, which is essentially cutting off ties from Kiev, to their response and their call for help.
Mm-hmm. Well, briefly, Paula, it looks inevitable after Kiev and what you've been saying, an inevitable clash between the two sides.
It certainly does seem as if some kind of clash is going to be inevitable. I mean, the latest word is that the United States is saying that it will support Crimea militarily if necessary. Poland has evacuated its consulate from Crimea. The United States is warning its citizens not to visit the Ukraine. So tensions on the ground escalating, and it certainly does seem as if we could see some kind of militarily response. Certainly Russia's prepared to increase its troops if necessary, and the big question is whether or not Europe will send troops here to do the same.
Paula Slier, RT in Crimea today. Thank you very much. Viktor Yushchenko was Ukraine's president until he lost in 2010 to Viktor Yanukovych, who fled to Russia. I spoke with Yushchenko this week in Kiev. Here's part of this exclusive interview. Former President Viktor Yushchenko paid a dear price to survive Ukrainian politics. The whole world followed his poisoning and its devastating effect. Yushchenko was the one who defeated Viktor Yanukovych in the first round back in 2004. And here's the surprise. He looks fine.
time heals. That's why I feel better today compared with 2 or 3 years ago, and especially better than I was in 2004. You know, what I've been through is a modest price to pay for what is called independent Ukraine.
What do these people in Kiev want? Yushchenko has no doubts.
The Ukrainian nation has been marching towards independence for 350 years. Today, the vast majority of Ukrainians considers their country sovereign, indivisible, and independent. If we examine Russian history 300 years ago, 100 years ago, or today, the Ukrainian issue has always been on the top of the agenda in Russian politics. While Putin is building his new kingdom, the new Russian Empire, without Ukraine, this plan cannot be executed.
As for Vladimir Putin, Yushchenko has this harsh comparison.
I think Putin thought that in East Ukraine he would be greeted with flowers, as Hitler was. But no one met him with flowers. Not in Crimea, not in Donbas Arena, and not in Kharkiv. This problem is not Ukraine's alone. This problem pertains to the whole world. Therefore, one need not ask whose bells ring. They ring for each and every one of us. I think Putin is weary of two things: the Russian response and the international community's response. Therefore, when we ask, what are the basic conditions to the solution of this conflict? The answer is scheduled and massive presence of key players in global politics, key states, and identification with the Ukrainian people.
Viktor Yushchenko is working now to restore some of Ukraine's economy. He is considered close to opposition leader Vitaly Klitschko, and that's how he sees Ukraine's future.
Are you optimistic that this thing will resolve and Russian forces and Putin will just go away? Or are we going towards an inevitable conflict?
This is Putin's dream, the dream to overcome Ukraine. But I am certain when I say that Putin will not be able to defeat Ukraine. Putin will not defeat Ukraine. We can lose a particular local battle, but we will not lose the war. That's why, in this case, I am optimistic.
Because it looks like there's two choices. Either you go with the West or you go with Russia. Is there any way in between?
No, there is no compromise. It's like asking if right to left driving directions can be inverted left to right. There is no compromise here.
US President Barack Obama met with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu at the White House this week. It was built up in the media as a sure confrontation between the two regarding the peace process, but the situation in Ukraine changed everything.
Since the Russian intervention, we've been mobilizing the international community to condemn this violation of international law and to support the people and government of Ukraine. This morning, I signed an executive order that authorizes sanctions on individuals and entities responsible for violating the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine or for stealing the assets of the Ukrainian people. According to my guidance, the State Department has also put in place restrictions on the travel of certain individuals and officials. These decisions continue our efforts to impose a cost on Russia and those responsible for the situation in Crimea.
We believed, we believe, and we will believe that Ukraine is not only our closest neighbor, but is indeed our brotherly republic. And our armed forces are brothers in arms, friends. Many of them know each other personally. And I'm confident that Ukrainian soldiers will not be on the opposing sides of the barricades, but on the same side of the barricades.
Incidentally, according to a national public opinion poll published this week here in Israel, President Obama did not do very well. Only 9% of Israelis believe that President Obama will have the upper hand in this crisis in Ukraine, as opposed to 49% who believe that Putin will be the winner. 24% say neither of them, and 13% do not know. And this has been a special Ukraine edition of The World This Week. We'll see you here next week. Have a good week.